excited that we have these 2 days together. I hope we have some fun and that we learn quite a bit. Here is the schedule we have set for today. So it's basically some chance to talk this morning, and Erica Zahner and Luciano are going to come and talk about citizen science at Bhutan and Wikiavis and eBird, things they know quite a bit about. And you can see some things that are already going on here, have a long history, especially here at Bhutan. There's a long history of citizen science. So that will be good. You start to connect with things that you know are already going on. And then we have a break from 12 until 2. And I should move that up. I'll move that back up. But we have a break starting at 12 for lunch. We'll go from 12 into 2, and then we reassemble at the Bhutan. We're going to do our field work together. And what's especially exciting is Erica has her specialists, her naturalists there, who know the area and know particular taxa, and they will join us. So that's very nice. That's one of the specialists. Do you have a specialist? Do you have a, no?
No, I'm not a specialist.
Okay. Anyway.
Just a volunteer.
Just a volunteer. Okay, so we'll have them join us. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to do 2 things to begin with. We have to make sure that they are ready to go. So I don't know if they know iNaturalist or not. So maybe since you already have some experience, you might have to teach them. And then we'll get some instructions about how to use the grounds, to be respectful and to follow some kind of protocol, whatever you decide on. And then we'll go out and see what we can do. And we'll make our collections, try to find out some things, try to enjoy the beauty of what's there and what it means for us. And we have the afternoon to do that. And I'm not sure exactly how Erica wants to spend the time. And it may, of course, depend on the weather. Whenever you do field work, there are ways of paying attention to what's happening around me. And I read that there's a chance of rain. I don't know at what hour. Did anybody look at the weather? What time? 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Yeah, I heard later, but so it's changed a number of times. When it comes time for that, if there's some kind of bad weather, then I think we should be flexible. We don't want to go out in the rain, get soaked. That's not what citizen science is about. If you're a real biologist and you have a schedule, maybe you go out in the rain. But if you were going out in the rain to study butterflies, what would you get? 0. You could get a 0. It'd be a total waste of time, so you wouldn't do it. Right? It just doesn't make sense. The butterflies want sun, and many animals just retreat. Maybe if you were doing plant biology and just trying to find out what's there, you could do it.
But the frogs come out.
The frogs come out, exactly. That's when the frogs like to come out, especially. They'll start to call. I don't know, do you have day active frogs here? Or mostly night active? Night? Okay. At night or day when the frogs are active?
What do you mean?
When can you see the frogs? Can you see them during the day?
24 hours a day, depends on the species.
Yeah, that's right. And some, in the US, some of the toads, the terrestrial frogs, are very active when it rains. That's when they really see them. For each taxa, we have our times. Okay. Now the other thing is that I asked you to share with me what your goals were, what you really wanted to learn about, and not surprisingly, they're quite varied, and that's fine, because citizen science itself has many components. It goes all the way from just someone who wants to volunteer, to someone who's helping organize it, to someone who's working on the software, to someone who is trying to analyze data, to someone who is studying all of citizen science. So there's many different roles we have. There's also people who just work sort of on data curation, these data librarians or Is the term data science something that people are starting to use here? So that's a huge growing field in the United States. All of a sudden, you see seminars, and people are coming and students and instructors are going to these courses for a week, like citizen science, and just learning about data science and using these tools that now are available. Okay. Do we have any questions or comments or ideas about what we should be doing or how we should proceed? Okay, let's go look at what happened last week. The last thing we did is we went outside and we took some pictures about try to get some biodiversity data. And we have this list here, and one of the things you see is that many people have joined, but there haven't been that many observations yet. Okay? So who here has their computer? Can they go and look? Go on your phone? If you don't, kind of look over somebody's shoulder maybe. Because I want to show you what you can do. There's lots of different things you can do. If you go to the project, here's all the projects. Here's a puzzle. Another view. This talks about, this is the big view, and it tries to start showing people what they're seeing and who's contributing what. So if Natalia, 26, puts up a picture of herself, then it looks a little nicer, right? Now people are shy, and I don't ever require that, but if you were a manager of a project, you would ask people to kind of make it a little nicer by putting up their picture, or putting up some symbol of a species or something, right? So this is designed to automate how the views look. And then it also has start to put up some pictures of things that people see. And it's very funny that it ends up in this location. I have no idea why it's doing that. That shouldn't happen. It should come close to where the data are. And it's probably because of this. It's probably because I've been doing this. My mouse has probably been going there. If I do this, maybe it comes back. Oh, we're totally lost. We're in Australia or somewhere. So let's that just made us big. We'll come back. If I click on here, I want to show you. This is where we were before. You can see all the people and what they are contributing. So that's a good. If you wanted to follow an individual, you could see what a person was doing there. And then, oh, so now it came back when I reloaded. So there's where our observations were. That's good. And we should be able to zoom in. Then we start to see people's data. And so after today, we'll have a lot more dots. Okay? I want to tell you about some more options here. And those are that there's a way to add using a bulk uploader. what that means is that someone could have a lot of observations that they wanted to share, and that they could arrange them more easily in some kind of spreadsheet format. And then they could all go up at once. For historical observations, that's a good option. Okay? Then another thing is that there's this export observations. And so one of the requirements in many kinds of applications is that you can get things in easily and you can get them back out. So when you're evaluating software, say you decide, this isn't what I want something else. If you can't get things easily in and easily out, don't use it. I mean, it's a pretty common requirement now for software engineers. Or the option is, if you really like it, go talk to the software engineers and ask them. Maybe there's some trick or some unknown feature that you haven't seen yet. Because that's a very standard thing. But if it's not very obvious, then you go, I don't want this. Does that make sense? So here we have this option here of these different formats. And one can see symbols, and those symbols represent different kinds of files. Our computer science people here can tell us. So Alan knows what a CSV file is. Can you tell the students what a CSV file is, Alan?
Sorry? CSV?
Yeah, what's a CSV file?
It's like a spreadsheet, but the content is text, split by comma.
It means
It's line.
comma separated values,
Yes.
right? And so it's a very widely used format, and it's easy to get it in and out of other things. So if you wanted to analyze your data in some other program, which most people today are using R, you would, or some other statistical program, that would be an easy way to analyze the data, would be to take it out that way. However, there are other formats here. We'll ask Alan about KML. What's KML?
It's a just special type of file, but I'm not sure
That's okay.
what means the
Yeah. How would you find out what it is?
how.
Yeah, how would you find out what KML means?
Google.
That's what we all do, right? And there would be a definition, and you could use it. What it is it's a markup for mapping. It's an easy language to represent objects for mapping. And sometimes the most important thing you want to do is you want to take that and just show things spatially. Maps are very powerful, right? We can learn a lot from a map. So KML might be really helpful if you wanted to map something. And I myself have no idea, because I've never used it, Atom. I don't know what that means. But I would be like Alan, I would Google it if I wanted to learn what it was. Do you know what Atom is?
No.
No. Okay.
Symbol looks like the part as being
Yeah? Okay. So we have a hypothesis. We'll click it just to see what it says. And it looks like an XML kind of thing. But this form, if you do this, it's important to take a look here, because it has a little bit of a complicated export. And that's, the reason is because it gives you many choices. So it allows you, first of all, to filter. Can people see that? Is it too small? A little small. Let me see if I can make it larger. I didn't want to do that. Anyway, it has a filter. It has a place, it has taxon, it has a rank, it has a user, it has a project. So it allows you to choose what portion of the file you want, of all the observations in that project, because it's got the project name there. Okay, so it's a nice way to get data back out. It allows you to sort of select what you want, and then you can start to analyze it. And something like this, a very important rule about this, which many of you I'm sure know, but I just want to reinforce, is don't ever hesitate to try it and push a button. The worst thing that can happen is what? What's the worst thing? Your computer blows up. No, right? It just doesn't work. And then you just try again. That's the great thing about computers, right? It doesn't break. Usually it does. It might do something a little funny, but you just try again. So then the next thing it does is it gives a little preview. So it shows you something, and then it has all this other way. Look at all the data it has. It has some basic data about what's going on, and then you start to see something that you might not have thought about. I just put in a few data points, right? I just put in a few observations. But look at, out of all this stuff it has here, it has many variables. And this is this idea of metadata. Have people heard that idea, metadata? Many of you probably have. Without the metadata, it's very hard to really assess what's going on or the meaning of the data. So when you have a project like this, even if something as simple as just taking pictures, you want to make sure that you have lots of other kinds of information. So you can start studying that and see what it means. And if the plan goes forward the way we've been describing it, it's likely this will all be in Portuguese, making it easier for everybody here, not just the people who are so good at English, to see what's going on and use it. Now, we'll go down here. So this is sort of just about everything that's going on. Then we go to the second level, and this is called geo. So that's about location. And there's lots of ways that you can get it to export this stuff. And you may say, you know, I don't need all that. So you just uncheck the boxes and export what you want. But it's very valuable when you're doing this to just see what's there and why would they put that there? What importance is it? How can that help me or hurt me? Then you have this taxonomic data, which for biodiversity is the very, very difficult, painful thing. So I'll say a little bit more of this later, or maybe I just say it now. But if I wanted to give you a chemical, we would have a name for it. Right? All these drugs, they all have, it's an aspirin, it's this, it's that, right? Or it's a generic name, but we know the chemical formula. Nobody fights about it. If I take this chemical and I give it to somebody anywhere in the world and they analyze it, we all agree what it is. It may be complex. It may be hard to exactly figure it out, but we know in the end. We know how many carbon molecules it has, how many nitrogen molecules. Nobody argues about it. And there are no problems with names. Biology! It's a different story. We have a long history of naming things and not agreeing, so there's lots of names out there, and they want to call it this, and this person wants to call it that. It becomes less of a scientific exercise and more of a social or political exercise. So as biodiversity has become more important, people have decided, oh, maybe it would be good to everybody decide what this is. And we won't fight about it anymore, we'll just call it this. And oh, by the way, what about all these other things we can't decide on? Well, we'll just put them over here. You know, I bet you have a drawer in your house. You open up the drawer, it's kind of messy. Does anybody have a drawer like that? Yeah, I have a drawer like that. It's where you don't have the right place for something, but you need to put it somewhere. So in taxonomy, they do that all the time. You know, it doesn't go here, it doesn't go here. We'll put it over in this drawer. And sometimes that drawer is very rich. It has things you really need, right? So they do that in taxonomy too. So it's not like chemistry. It's more difficult. It's problematic. The good news is, citizen science doesn't usually deal with those messy things. He says gingerly, because it's not quite true. But most taxa that citizens are interested in are better studied. They're more interesting. And the best known taxa, of course, are birds. We know the most about birds. And birds tend to try to follow the rules of what we do, falling neatly into categories. But once you go to the field and you start looking, oh, here's an exception, oh, here's an exception, oh, here's an exception, oh, it doesn't look quite right, what is it? But those exceptions are fine. They're not that common in most taxa, and they stimulate interest in research. So if you start to find things like that, people tend to get excited. And that's good for citizen science. Trying to understand something new or learning more about how biology really works. It's not so clean as chemistry or physics. It's more interesting. So with this taxonomy, we do our best to have these categories. Now, the really bad thing is that when you go to find those categories, our friends in the taxonomy world, anybody a taxonomist here before I start talking about, no, okay. So our friends in the taxonomy world have spent most of their time trying to discover new things. That's very exciting for them. And it would be for me too. All of us, if we discover a new species, oh, that's very exciting. And that would be very much part of their job, to discover new things. And so if you ever have a chance to talk to taxonomists, they're very focused on their taxa, and they're very excited about it. That's good. Taxonomy was the rage in 1880. And then it was the rage in the early 1900s. And then we had all these other developments in biology. And now they take taxonomists and they put them in the far deep recesses of the museum. And then all of a sudden in 1990, we said, oh, biodiversity, that's important, we know that. And taxonomists sort of came back a little bit, and now they're sinking away again. At least in the United States. I don't know how it is in Brazil. But I can imagine it's not that different here in Brazil, because we have medicine, we have climate change, we have ecosystems, we have all these other things. But we really need the taxonomists. Maybe eventually we have more citizen taxonomists to get the job done. I'm not sure, but we need that. And we need one more thing from them that they haven't done yet. They haven't said, oh, for all you people who need to use this every day, who aren't specialists, who don't go into the museum and see the specimens, we're going to give you our best guess of what that name should be. We as a community will talk, and this is the best we understand now that everybody agrees on. Here you go. They don't do that usually now. They do a little bit more, but they could do a lot better. So that's one thing. Citizen science needs more help from the taxonomists. That's something I'm working on. In the meantime, we do the best we can and try not to lose sleep about it. And so we have this hierarchy. Were people taught this hierarchy? Here. Were people taught this hierarchy? Do people believe in the hierarchy? Is it a real thing or not? Do you think it's real? Or is it a mental construct to help us organize things? Yes? Which one?
created.
Huh?
We created.
We created that. Is it useful for us? Does it help us organize things? So, in the United States, in 1850, a whale was called a fish. It lived in water. It must be a fish. But we know now that from a biological point of view, that's a silly idea. Whales have hair, they nurse their young, they are mammals, and that tells us about their evolution. Right? So, of course, the taxonomy is useful and helps us organize things. Is it exactly what this nice branching tree? Oh wait, where's the drawer? I'll put it in this drawer. This is our way to make drawers. This is our, but if you look closely, you see all those doors, there are messy drawers, very messy drawers, when you start looking. Especially if you're a taxonomist, you know where to look, you know where they store the mess. And then sometimes, all of a sudden there'll be this big pronouncement, because someone will go look in one of those drawers, and they'll see, oh, it doesn't belong in that drawer. We've had it in that drawer for 100 years, but we never looked. And now we can take it out and we have more confidence about which drawer it goes in and how it should be assigned. Does that make sense? Okay. So when you're doing these projects, if you're not a taxonomist, sometimes you can get help from a taxonomist. But the most important thing you can do is you can ask, did the taxonomists make something that is the current standard by which we can call things? Because everyone knows that next week it might be called something else. And for science, we have to keep track of that. Are people familiar with this term called provenance? You heard that term, provenance? So the first time I heard it, it was in art history, because they wanted to know where the painting came from. Was it real or a fake? And so they said, can we trace back who owned it? Did it really come from the artist? Or did somebody over here just make a nice duplicate and sell it as the real thing? It's a very lucrative thing to do. If you can paint a Matisse painting yourself and sell it as Matisse, you can make a lot of money. So art dealers sometimes sell things as Matisse when they know they're not, because they make a lot of money too. And so if you're buying a painting, you really want to know, where did that come from? Or right now, there's all these controversies in art about the World War II, when the Germans took paintings from people illegally, and now there's reparation. People are finding these paintings. It belonged to my family. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to this art museum. And so if you can show you owned it, maybe you can get the museum or somebody else to give it back to you. So provenance in terms of computer science and data is, where did that data come from? In this case, it's even a little bit more confusing, because it's, where did that taxonomy come from? So if one taxonomy called it one thing and the next one called it something else, then we can kind of trace back and we know what it is. So that's the dirtiest secret in biodiversity.
Talking about the author of the species, those in brackets, like Linnaeus.
Right.
No,
So
it's not
the
it.
first person who names it is
Yeah.
in the brackets.
Yeah.
And that is the way we can go find the original description.
But it's not what you're talking about. You're talking about who?
I'm talking about,
something
as we
more-
go on, that name can change. And we have to, and so everybody who wants to change the name has to publish that. And sometimes it can change 5 or 6 times. I say this. They don't really, they don't have a very good process for deciding that. It's not like the chemists. You know, one person can study something over here, and they can say, oh, mine is this and mine is this. And then somebody studies in the middle and says, oh, I think they're all the same. And so then sometimes we can kind of keep track of that, but sometimes we can't very well. And some groups of species are much more difficult. Birds are relatively easy. Plants, very difficult, for 2 reasons. Plants are very morphologically flexible. You grow a plant here, it looks one way, you grow over here, it looks different. But they mate and they do all these nice things that you would expect of a species to do. And then plants are much more diverse. So if you were to do trees here in Brazil, which would be a very exciting thing to do because of the great diversity here, and lots of studies going on, trees would be relatively well known. But there are other groups that would be more difficult. In general, people pick the easy things to do for citizen science because they're large and well known, well studied. But I just want you to know that it can be complicated. Okay, this helps you ask the tough questions of the people who are helping you. If you go to the biologist, well, what taxonomy are you going to use? I'll tell you one more secret. So in iNaturalist, what's happened is that things have started to change. So they started with standard taxonomies. Things have started to change, and their users know the changes occurred. And they say, we want to change this, it's new. And so they said, okay, you can change it. And that was smart because it helped their users be engaged. It's not so good from a taxonomic point of view because the community didn't say it changed. That's a problem that we need to work on. with the taxonomic community. We need to ask them to say, we love taxonomy, we love what you do, but you need to tell us what your best ideas now of what we should call it, how it's related to others. Okay? All right, so that just gives you the inside track.
But does iNaturalist have kind of, I don't know how to say that, glossary, I don't know, something to show the synonyms of the species?
No, not really. It tries to use standard lists where the synonym issue is resolved. So if you get really interested in this, you can come with us to Tagwig meeting, and you can learn about all the efforts to try to deal with synonyms. So for almost 40 years now, people from around the globe have been trying to figure out how to do that. How to deal with those synonyms, how to make this resolution. And I can point you to lots of projects. In fact, just last night, we were talking. Alan has some nice references. There's the Global Names Project. There's a plant taxonomy resolution service, so a web service to try to take these names and make sense of them. I would say that it's messy, very messy still, and you don't want to spend too much of your time as a citizen science worrying about that.
And is there something like, if I write something wrong, like Anona, one double N, one N, there are a lot of N's in this genus. And
So-
if I put the N in the wrong place.
So the way we deal with that mainly is we was in iNaturalist, they have a standard list. So we don't introduce all those other misspellings. In the historical literature, there's a lot of that though. Just the misspellings, because it's not electronically, it's not a drop-down list. So we've gotten rid of that kind of stuff by only giving people a fixed number of names to choose. It could be, so the misspelling problem is greatly reduced. Historically, it's been a big problem because it's hard to spell those things, and the spellings change slightly, and I'm a human. Humans make mistakes no matter what it is. Machines are less likely to do that. Yeah.
You may have seen that when you try to enter a name to your photo, to your record, it already suggests a name. So you just type one or two letters. That's because it's trying to match what you're typing to what is in that list that Rob mentioned. So hopefully, if you try to write like Apis mellifera, abedda, with one L, you'll show it with two L's, which is the right one. So you won't be able to enter with the wrong spelling unless you insist. Otherwise, it will show you the right one. So there are, Alan can tell better about that, but there are some algorithms which try to match what you're trying to write with what is in the list. And for Brazil, for instance, it's not the case of iNaturalist, but we plan to have that integrated in the future as we work with them. The list of the Brazilian flora, which is the Flora do Brasil, which is held by the Jardim Botânico at Rio, we can use that for to be our reference list for Brazilian plants. So it's not there because they work with a international list, but probably you can attach to a specific project like that, the São Paulo Challenge. You can attach that or to our project a list of Brazilian plants instead of all the world's plants. So that's something we want to work.
Yeah.
But if it is the first grade,
I'm sorry?
if you do the first
Yeah.
grade, that's not a list.
No, yeah. If you're the one to see that plant,
Yeah.
it won't be there.
Right. That's, for citizens, that's highly unlikely. It just turns out that, at least in the United States, maybe in Brazil, where there's so much more diversity, and that would be very exciting. Then you, and I'm sure for certain taxa, for insects, there's so many insects here. We have no idea. For the insects you see in the city, probably not, but maybe if you went to the forest. And one group I know a little bit about are insects that live in water, aquatic insects, and they're important for cleaning water and for measuring water quality. In the United States, we know the genus, but we don't know the species, as it were. I think we could do that now with DNA pretty easily. I've thought of citizen science projects to do that would be fun, because now you have DNA and you can associate place and DNA and a picture, and then people would know. People like to have a name, that's the other thing. People really like to put things in categories. It's very hard for us to accept that it's unknown or that it's not quite perfectly in category. I always think it's like all our discussions now about gender. So boy or a girl, can't be something unknown. Well, it turns out probably is. And we can change. Not as quickly as fish, but. Okay, there is one last secret to tell you about taxonomy, the last big hurdle. Can anybody guess what that is? Does anybody know what that last is? The last?
What was it?
Nobody said, the last secret about taxonomy and its problems for citizen science. There's one last problem. If you were to call a species by a name, what's your favorite species that's not humans? What would you say? Any kind of plant or animal, what would you call it?
I get it.
So is that a scientific name?
No.
No.
Local names.
Huh?
We use local names.
That's right, exactly. We use these.
Call it the papagayo.
Yeah, we use a common name. Yeah. So citizen science also have all the common names. So we have to have a separate taxonomy associated with the scientific taxonomy that is the common names. And that helps everybody, because if you commonly see something, you don't want to use these awkward Latin long names, you want to use a common name. So we have to, on top of the scientific names, we have to build common names, and we have to link those properly, and we have to change both of them, but make sure the links are right. So that's why in biodiversity studies of citizen science, the taxonomy issues, it is complicated. from a management point of view. It doesn't start that way because we start with the common names we all know and we start with the common species we know. But if you start to grow the system, then you come to problems. So our taxonomist friends can help us. You, the citizen, have to decide the common names. And it turns out for many, most species, there aren't common names. So even that could be a fun kind of way to engage people, is to get common names. The other thing that is true is over here, it's called one thing, over here another, over here. I study a fish, I think I mentioned this fish that migrates up the water. I called it an alewife. I looked up, it has 20 common names, all the same fish. And that's where science started. It said that these are all the same thing. You're calling them all these different names because it's a local name, but they're really all the same thing. If you collect them all and look at them and look at their DNA and breeding, they're all the same. But sometimes, for some people, you have to use more than one name. You have to set it up locally for them, what they call it. And the most obvious thing is, in different languages, we have different common names. So, this is the Achilles heel of biodiversity studies. And it's more difficult in citizen science than in standard science, because we have to have our own common name taxonomy, because people use common names in different ways. But I would guess that most of the time, for the things that you choose to engage people with, that it won't be a big problem. I know in the United States that for butterflies, that it has been a problem. So if it's a problem in the US for butterflies, it's probably a problem here for butterflies, because you have many more species and fewer taxonomists. That's the guess. I think that's a pretty likely. But for the butterflies in Sao Paulo, probably no problem. So it's as you start to go out or start to explore less well-known areas. Does that make sense? I should tell you one last thing that's just because I'm an academic and I like this stuff. This idea of a hierarchy is something that was used to test the idea that people all around the world share a common way of organizing things mentally. There was a time in psychology, or anthropology more, psychology, sociology, when certain people were arguing that development is everything. We don't share any common concepts. And so some anthropologists, psychology types went around and tested literate and illiterate people in diverse parts of the world and just asked them, how do they organize the natural world? And everywhere, everybody organized it hierarchically. So that's a natural way to do it. And it also proved their point that people are actually not all different. We all can organize things the same way. And so it's a nice case because it applies to biodiversity. So if you were to work with indigenous people, it's very likely they would organize things hierarchically. In fact, we would be surprised if they didn't. But what's different is in scientific taxonomies, they're very deep. There are many levels to go down, 15, 18 or something like that from the highest levels. In indigenous taxonomies, they're only about 3 or 4 deep. It's a plant or an animal. It's this kind of animal or that. And then it's this or that. The only other thing that's sort of interesting about this is in indigenous taxonomies, they very much reflect the needs of the people. So if they can see small differences in the kinds of plants or how they use them, they'll give them all different names. It's reflects very much what they need. It's not sort of about doing a total catalog, it's just what I need. But it is the case that if people are in a natural area studying things, it turns out they usually know most or all the species. They teach everybody what the species are because they might be of use or they're used in certain situations, so they provide some kind of information. So I'm sure the indigenous people here in Brazil know a lot of taxonomy, especially about birds and mammals and things like that. They would know, and plants, the big things. Any other questions or comments about this?
Just something to you, remind, talking about that I've heard, I'm not specialist in indigenous things, but I've heard for Eskimos,
Yep.
they have 18 classification of white.
Right.
They have 18 whites. It makes sense where it's white. We
Yeah.
just see white.
Right. So that's a good example of this phenomenon where it matters. Yeah, so I've heard similar stories, and it's related to traveling in those environments, traveling over snow of different qualities. It matters, and so they're very good at distinguishing. Where I would just say, oh, it's snow, they would have lots of names. And where I started as a child to really worry about that is skiing. So where I'm from, in the winter, there's lots of snow, and I would go skiing, and it really matters what kind of snow it is about how your ski glides. So then you start to talk to people about that and describe it in different ways. It's a very, very practical matter.
Just one thing regarding her point, I don't know her name,
Oh, sorry.
the lady beside you.
Lilian.
Lily. Maybe you could point out that, for instance, you mentioned if someone comes up with a new species, one good thing about iNaturalist and other tools is that you can just put it there without a name. Of course, you'll be able to notice that it's a plant or maybe it's an insect,
Yeah.
and then the others may help you to identify that. I did that in Naturalist once, so I only knew that it was a Lepidoptera. So I just put it there, and then someone came up with the right name and showed another photo with an identical individual.
Questions or comments?
For the marine environment, we have some sites that are constantly putting the more recent names of the organisms.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are doing this for example, Flora do Brasil and the marine species.
Right.
And actually, it wouldn't be a problem of information. I think the problem is this communication with the systems, isn't it? Because, for example, there is a system called worms, the World Registers of Marine Species. People are daily putting these new names, new innovations in taxonomy. And
So what do other people think about this? Is this a problem of information or is it a problem of communication? What do you think?
You have a different information, different problem of information. You can communicate. Machines can communicate.
Machines can communicate. Oh, yes,
You can
machines are
figure
very
out
quick,
if
huh?
If two words are like the species names are the same, machines can figure out that. We can look and say, oh, these are the same species, or
Right.
this name changed for that name, but the machine don't know.
So more and more we're figuring out how machines can greatly increase the speed of communication. Humans have a couple problems. They have this problem called discovery. People know about the discovery problem. It's so much more easily solved by computer science. One of the reasons that we all have cell phones now, we all have a cell phone, everybody has a cell phone, right? Is because if you need some information, this software is much better at discovering it than you are, much faster. In the United States, there used to be this famous challenge where you could call the New York Public Library and they could answer all your questions. If you had a question, they prided themselves in being able to look up all those common questions. They knew, they just knew. But that's totally obsolete now. Not only do we have many more questions than we used to, but we can get them much faster. I think the surprise for a lot of people was Google was so good at it. You know, most of the time you don't go by the second page. But it depends on also knowing what people like to ask. It's not just what answer it is, but they figure out what people like to ask and can grow that algorithm, that feedback circuit. That make sense? Yeah, okay. I want to get back here. We're making important progress. Okay. So the final thing here is you export. And then that produces a file. So we're back to iNaturalist. We're thinking about getting our data. You produce an export and you get the data. And then you can use it for whatever you want. Okay? I'm going to go back out of this now. Oh, I should do this. One of the things that people don't tend to know, but which is an option with iNaturalist, and one that adds some flexibility, is this here. It says observational fields. So the way that iNaturalist decided to work is it decided to work by having a standard set of fields. And then it said, well, sometimes people want more fields. That we can't think of everything you need, so you have the option of adding a field. Now, Alan knows that just randomly adding fields to databases has problems. You can't just keep adding fields. I want data, but iNaturalist thought, well, to start out, we'll still keep our standard database structure, but we'll allow you to keep adding fields. And I haven't heard any complaints about this from people who want to add fields because they want to add the number of buds on the plant or the number of flowers on the plant, right? If you were doing phenology, it might be nice to have that. And iNaturalist will do that. In your own project, you can add something. So that's a very nice flexibility. I think there are now 6,000 variables people have added, but they can store them in a way that it doesn't slow the machine down too much and not in an awkward way. So that's a really nice thing to be able to add that. Okay? Any more questions about that or comments?
Our configuration field has some ontology for.
So that's what the knowledgeable people would do. And in some projects, that's what they do. But here they're just very practical. Nothing sophisticated. Create a new variable. You want it, you can have it. So the people who designed this are not sophisticated computer science people who think of these really cool ideas. Instead, they're just very practical biologists. Neither of them is a biologist. Neither of them is a computer scientist. They both trained as biologists, but got interested in this. I guess I can say that Scott Laurie was a PhD in biology and started programming through R. Kenichi is the original founder, did this because he got a master's degree in library science where he did have to program. So he started from that point of view. I don't know why he chose Ruby on Rails, but, you know, there are many platforms that work. Okay, any questions or comments about that? All right. I wanted to now go here. Here's our list. Now, if I go to here, I can start to see what's there and so on. If I click on my name, there's what I have in my profile. I put that in. Then here are my observations. And this is another thing to teach you. I made a bunch of observations. I made some here when we went out the 27th. See this starting here? We went out the 27th. We took some pictures. And we added them. And it says here they all need an ID. There's nobody in Brazil that's sort of thinking, I want to identify something. But I'm hopefully the field biologists and specialists at Butantan will start doing this. They'll just think it's fun, or they'll tell their friends about it. Because there's no question that people know this. People here know this. Maybe somebody like Peter knows these species. Or
No.
other biologists here know these species. But they have to go in and they have to add IDs. So that's one thing that can happen. The other thing that can happen is I click this button. In English, batch edit means that I can do one operation all at once, right? Batch means I can do it all at once. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this, and this, and this, and this. And these are all done right here in Sao Paulo, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. So I have a bunch of, this is the only one I knew. I found a dandelion. I know dandelions. At first I was worried, well, maybe I was tricked. But dandelions are very common where I live. And I looked at this plant and I wasn't totally sure, but I guess it was a dandelion. And then later I found what I'm absolutely sure was a dandelion. So I know dandelions occur here. This wasn't flowering, so I wasn't totally sure, but by the shape of the leaves I was pretty sure. So I've clicked all those, right? I got them all there. And now I do this. I go to add to project. And then I come down here to Sao Paulo and I go add. And then I can go to projects. Sao Paulo's here. And now all of a sudden, there are 23 observations. There were just 10. I added all those observations. And not very many have been identified, right? So we only have 9 species so far, but we have lots of work to do. And if we click on these, it shows all the observations for the project, I hope. It starts to show things. And this is where the naturalists can go through and really help us. They can start to identify things for us. And you can, give you very different ways to look. You can look as a grid, right? You can go that way. Or you can go by a list that we had before, or a map. So it gives you nice ways to show things. Any questions about that? Comments? Do people now think, so we have, it's one of the things that I noticed is that we had this situation here. We have our members. And we have a lot of zeros. There are a lot of people there who have zeros. They didn't add anything. Now could you add something? Do you see that batch option that you can add your observations? You can also do it in the app as you upload. There's a button there that says share, and then you select the projects you belong to, and you can see which project you want to add it to. Okay?
I added the one, but it doesn't appear. It's still 0.
Okay, so does it appear in your list? When you go to your name, Can you see it?
Observation by you.
So there's a three-step process. First, you have to register online or on your web, right? You have to register. The next thing you have to do is make an observation. And then you have to add it to the project. So I'm guessing that you didn't do that last step. Now that seems painful, doesn't it? Why do I have to make that last step and add it to the project? And that's because there's many projects. And they take a person-centric, I want my data, I want me, this is all the things I did. So they have you, and they have to resolve what goes to which project. I may be in more than one project. There is one special condition that they have. And that special condition is that you, when you set up a project, you can say, I'll take everything that's in the area of my project in this time window. And it automatically goes in. You don't have to add it manually. To do that, you have to use a way to define the boundaries. If you define the boundaries, then it'll automatically show up. I didn't want to do this with this project because I wanted you to learn the process of manually clicking and adding, because that hangs people up. Any questions or comments?
If I select an observation for a specific project like that,
Yeah?
the observation goes to the common.
Yeah, so here's an example. Here's a friend of mine, Colin Hanks. Colin is an expert at iNaturalist. And he works for a conservation, for the state of Texas. And Colin has developed this project over a number of years. Okay, so this is going pretty good. Take a look at this. He's got a lot of people, 4,000 observations, 1,800, 1,700. A lot of people are out there doing a lot of work. He's got a total of 46,000 observations. He's got 1,000 people engaged, and he's got 243 species. They know a lot more about what reptiles and amphibians they have in Texas than they used to, all through citizen science. So the state said, do something, so he said this is going to work. So he set it up, he recruited people, and he makes it fun for them. But you can see that, as before, it's the same structure. Instead of our small class, 1,000 people participated, okay? And there's the most recent observations. He's able to set up this boundary naturally using iNaturalist. There's certain kinds of boundaries you can guess because they have the data, they call it thesaurus. No, they call it, it's not a thesaurus, that's a word dictionary. They have a place name dictionary. So you can choose perhaps a state or city boundary. We could try that later for Brazil. I haven't tried it for Brazil. But you could see it might naturally set up those places. Or you're allowed to import your own boundaries if you have the GPS coordinates and name it what you want. So you have that flexibility too. Does that make sense? Import the space? Okay. So that's really fun. So he can keep track of that. He has his, they call this the leaderboard up here, right? Who's the most popular, most successful person? Who gets the badge? And maybe this works in Brazil in one way, but maybe you need more kinds of badges. From what people have been telling me over the last several days, that Brazilians would like this, but they would like it in more ways. And so maybe that's one of the software features we could add. Maybe it's the first one to find X. Maybe the first one to find X in a particular place. Maybe it's the first one in a time period. But all of a sudden, for somebody to be featured, then they can share that on Facebook or something like that. Okay? Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is, and Colin has just 2 people he recruited. To oversee this. He got 2 professors and somebody else, I think, or maybe just 2 professors, to be the experts to review the photographs. But you also have this journal option. And look, he has these challenges. He put up challenges for people. I don't know if that'll be popular here in Brazil or not, but it's generally popular to give challenges to people. And so look at this. Here's his Century Club. You know, those are the people that got so many observations last year. So he has different kinds of challenges, and if they make it for the year, then he announces it. Okay, so that's a fun option to have a journal and talk about what people are doing. And in general, more and more projects understand that component of the project can be important. Whatever kind of culture you adopt and reward, that might not be so good for other people. It's a little bit tricky sometimes, I think. In the United States, among the birding community, there's lots of different kinds of birders. For eBird, it's the chasers, the people who like to list. We have a word for them called twitcher. Is that word known in Brazil, a twitcher? So that means somebody who is just so excited about catching every bird, and they don't care anything about the biology of the bird, what the bird is, they just want to write it in their list. So that's sort of good and bad, but eBird is successful because it's really helping people who love to go see new birds, travel around the world and see new birds. Whereas I use eBird, and I'm not like that. I'm not, even in my county. In my county, there's 300 birds or so, 300 species of birds. Not like Brazil, but there's quite a few. And I only have seen 100 of them. I haven't even traveled around my county. All I do is go this walk. I go to almost to the same place again and again and again and again and again. And so I have 300 lists per year. So I see the same birds over and over and over again. Well, that's very valuable to eBird. They don't care. That's fine with eBird. So, and I don't care if I'm first. Oh, maybe I would like to be, yes. Maybe I would. But I'm not, my behavior hasn't changed. I'm not hopping in the car and driving quickly. Once in a while I see there's a rare bird that shows up. I went to, there was a, what was it, a Ross's goose, I think it was, or a pink-footed goose, that's what it was. A pink-footed goose showed up, so it has to come from Iceland or it has to come from Europe. It showed up at a little pond 6 miles from my house. So I drove over there to see if I could find it, right? Not a long journey. People were coming from New York State. They were coming from Rhode Island and Connecticut. They want to see this goose, right? They heard about it, the network, through the network, and they're coming. And that's good, because it gets them more knowledgeable. You create this culture, it's fun. And I'm sure that happens here in Brazil. Do we have a blog for birds when somebody sees a rare species? A rare species of bird, do you go?
Well, I'm not a specialist in this, but there's WikiAvis, and
Yeah.
people throw everything in there and you get feedback.
Yeah. Do people then go running out to see the same bird?
Oh yes, many people do, of course.
So that's the same as,
I would like to mention, as you said, you are being cursed sometimes for repeating. I think repeating every year, even the same species, is a good information because it shows that the species is still there. Because we are losing species in Brazil.
so
And it's important to...
yeah, your observation is 100% right. 100%, I couldn't agree with more. I'm not being cursed so much as I'm not complying with the this chaser model. I'm not just looking for the new species. There are people that eBird doesn't trust very well because they don't put in all the species they see. One of the things eBird wants is you have to put in every bird you see. So when I go birding and I see a house sparrow, which I see almost every time, some people would say, this is boring. I do not want to do this anymore. It's another house sparrow. And that's why they go to other areas. But I don't mind. I'm a scientist. You know, I'm watching the behavior of the house sparrows. I'm thinking about how many they survive the winter. I'm thinking about whether they're breeding. I'm thinking about, has the male started to sing? I'm thinking, did the falcon catch them? You know, in my neighborhood, the falcons come through and eat the birds. So all those things, even though it's just a very common house sparrow, or a starling, which is very common where I live, or a pigeon, you know, when I'm walking around here. But here in Brazil, I come and I see the blue and white swallows. You can see those everywhere, it seems like, in Sao Paulo. Is that right? And to me, that's okay. So some people will think that's fine, other people will think that's boring. The good thing about citizen science is it usually doesn't care. If you like to stay in the city and record swallows, fine. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to, as long as you try to put in what you do see. Does that make sense? Okay. So this added feature of iNaturalist to make a journal and put out challenges, and you know, here's his. What did he do? He had a funny kind of thing that he gave. First place to Connor Adams, wins a stump ripper from Animal Equipment by, I don't even know what that thing is. Who knows what that is? Anyway, he's, so he has a fun thing. He says O'Connor has to take a sabbatical to South Africa. You know, he's just doing something fun, playful. And Brazilians are known for their playfulness, so they'll be able to write very fun, engaging things. And then all this other stuff. How many species can you find? You know, just there's the list of people out. And then, you know, other kinds of things. You know, how many can you see in a day? We have the big day coming for eBird. And what's so interesting to me is big day in the US is coming up in the end of May, but it's the wrong time of year here. It's the seasons are opposite here. So you want to have the big day in Brazil should be in your spring, sometime in October maybe. And so eventually that'll happen. We'll swap that. That makes much more sense. Maybe there'll be Brazil versus Massachusetts. Okay, any more questions about iNaturalist at the moment? Can anybody want to add anything? Any species to add? Any comments to add? Can you get your species in? How many people here joined iNaturalist? Raise your hand. How many have an observation? How many actually have a picture they took? So there's more pictures than things are in there. So you got to make sure you get yours in there. And those who joined and didn't add, what's wrong with you? What have you been doing? Are you computer scientists and can't see any species? You got to get out there and try this. Remember, we're all alive, right? It's really the living things that sustain us. Computers are great. Tables are great, all this stuff is great, but it's life that sustains us. Where would you be without plants? You wouldn't have any oxygen, right? You need life. Okay, let's take a break. Stand up and take a break, and when we'll come back, we'll talk a little bit about the paper. I'm not sure how much time we're going to have, but we have a little bit of time. So take a 5-minute break, stretch, go outside, get some. So you know in here, the concentration of CO2 has gone way up. Right, and that puts us to sleep. So stand up and stretch and come back in 5 minutes, or 7 minutes, whatever. Oh, there you go. Did you know we were here? I know it's Parte. Oh, no, 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 no.
Coloquei lá, eu sou aquela foto que tem cachorro.
Agora não sei se pode na transmissão.
Você é um cachorro com ossos.
I'm just starting
É
from the
aquele cara que
scratch.
dava pra pôr várias
The
de
level
uma
of
vez.
CO2 has
Eu
gone way
pus
up.
uma por uma, mas
É,
não
eu
sei.
também.
Tem
Eu
onde?
fui aumentando. Eu acho que aqui na
It's up to you.
internet,
Yeah, but you can do that in a minute. They'll all come back.
tem muito
Como ele dá
mais opção.
como ele dá um pause na transmissão e ela não
Mas ele
voltar.
falou que no aplicativo também tinha essa opção. Essa, pelo menos.
Não, pode só desligar a câmera.
Será que ele deixou você selecionar mais
Pra trás do Pará, porque pensei que talvez não volte
You
depois.
think you should be able to do it? You probably can. If it's a natural kind of thing to do. But we could try Googling it. Can you batch edit on the cell phone app? Just go, try Googling that. And it could be because of the limited space that really what they want, did you find the button share for the project? As you upload each object from your phone, there's a share button. And then you'll go to the right project. But
Desde
if
ontem,
that's
né?
not connected, then you have to do what I did with batch on your
Não.
computer. So you can do that whenever you get
Carregou,
to
deixa eu carregar.
Does that make sense?
Ah, não, então eu acho que de manhã ele aguenta. Foda é na segunda hora. Segunda hora tem que trocar. À tarde. Não, só de manhã.
Passou o negócio da internet.
Acho que ele aguenta, no período ele aguenta. Amanhã também? Amanhã de manhã eu tô lá no BM com o Marcelo. Vou tentar Então, amanhã, na parte da manhã, às 9, eu tô lá no BM com o Marcelo. Vai ter prova de multiplicadores, são 3 turnos. Precisamos levar para ver. Estou de manhã.
Não, mas a gente conversa amanhã.
Na Guarapiranga?
Não, aqui no Jacupiranga. Com o Fabião Resolveu.
Tá legal. Isso, obrigado.
Do Ribeira para baixo, quase Curitiba. Eu preciso juntar, não sei, a gente vai juntar.
Dia
Precisa de 3
13.
carros, a gente vai juntar. Sábado é o Big Day. E são os pagamentos feitos.
No ano passado já teve essa contada. O Fábio participou.
Qual faz?
O Fábio.
Mas o chumbo é o da cara, da gente é o dos peitos. A gente conversa.
Mas ele já está
Poli sem fios, se eu não me engano, é seu e-mail da Poli e só tem.
que eu não sou da Poli.
Tá, você tem. Você dá a rede do rolo, tá?
Não tem do
Tá.
tipo, ela, na verdade, ela some. Ela tipo, tá com uma conexão super.
Ó, isso é um voucher. Tenta acessar, tem uma rede chamada Light. Tá, isso. E aí você vai acessar o navegador, vai abrir um. Acesse esse número que você usar.
It's 11 point. I did. I changed it in all those slides, but not this one. So we'll fix it.
Okay, so I'll see somewhere around here.
Okay, it's time to get going again. We have a few people who are still eating outside because they're not supposed to bring food in. I posted, or they're on the phone. I asked you to read this paper about biodiversity and citizen science, and I hope you did. If you didn't, that's okay. We're going to talk about it together. And it's a brand new paper. It's written by a great friend of biodiversity, great group of people that I'll tell you a little bit about. And whenever you're writing grant proposals, this is a paper you have to cite, okay? It's the big picture. At the beginning of the proposal, this is a paper you want to cite, okay? So, it's just published last year, 2006. It's in an important journal, Biological Conservation. And the title is Contributions of Citizen Science Towards International Biodiversity Monitoring. Now, this is a person I know, Mark Chandler. He's in Boston, and he's the chief scientist with Earthwatch. Who here has heard of Earthwatch? Some of you have heard of Earthwatch?
A lot of times recently.
Okay, so Earthwatch has a very long history operating around the globe. It's made a lot of contributions. There's a separate paper I showed you that said they have a very high probability of getting the data published, which is the gold standard. So that's good. It's not always necessary. The project that I worked on for 20 years, there's only one paper in a very, very minor journal. But it's had a big policy impact. So I'm happy with that, okay? So there are other people here from different places. Kyle is with this group called the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF. This is where the facility that was created to be a portal for all the data in the world. So it's a big project. It gets OECD gives them money to maintain it. I think there's 15 or 20 employees. They take data from all around the world. Each country has a portal. So Brazil has a portal for biodiversity. Does anybody know the name of the portal in biodiversity, for biodiversity in Brazil? These two might, but where the data for biodiversity go in Brazil before they go? Yeah. Professor Soaiva told me that became the portal because it was the choice that worked politically. It was just a computer science place. They know nothing about biology there. So that's bad from my point of view. You would much rather have it where people knew about biodiversity. That would make sense. But we all know that politics drives a lot of things. So at least they have a portal. So we can be happy about that. Okay? Kyle works at the headquarters in Copenhagen. Some of you might want to go there sometime. You might want to get a job there. I think they hire people for 5 years at a time. They want people from all around the world. If you know about computers, maybe that would be a fun place to work. Okay. I know this guy, Finn Danielson. And he has written a lot of papers about monitoring in Africa and other places, especially where there's management issues for biodiversity. So there are a lot of nice papers he's written about that. This person I know, Abe Rushing-Miller, although he will never come to my university, I've tried 5 times to have him come and he never answers my email. And then when he meets me, oh, it's so nice to see you. Right? So he's a good guy. He has really spearheaded the the citizen science movement in the United States. He did his PhD in Boston, and he worked on phenology data. So they did a lot of work on phenology, and he was first at the Phenology Network headquarters in the U.S., and then he moved to this site with the federal government in Maine. But he's really worked hard, and he's written some very important publications about that. Greg Newman will talk about a little bit more later. Is another American. He runs citsci.org. Has anybody ever heard of citsci.org? I'm sorry.
How are you feeling about that?
I think,
Air conditioning?
to turn on the air conditioning.
Oh, yeah. No, that's fine. Comfort is important if you're learning anything. You should have a CO2 monitoring here.
Sit in comfort.
So, but there are lots of people I don't know here. Right? I don't know Linda, I don't know Astrid, I don't know Burnett, Alyssa, Aaron. So there are all these people here because they're from around the globe. They're working on different projects. it's now become an international kind of enterprise. However, if you look closely, you see it's really biased in two ways. It's biased to Anglo-speaking countries, and it's biased towards the Northern Hemisphere. Right? That's not where the biodiversity is. Where's the biodiversity? It's in the equatorial parts of the world. So it's in India, and Brazil, and Asia. So, but as they say here, we have these UN agreements, international treaties, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild, Flora, and the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species, as a way to globally agree on what to be doing to organize things. So they appeal to that broad global set of principles that we've tried to develop, of which I'm sure Brazil is a signatory. Slowly things are becoming more equitable and more people are contributing. That's why everybody's excited. One of the reasons I'm very excited to be here. The most specious country in the world, with lots to preserve and the interest to do it, and more importantly, the interest to engage people. It's only by engaging people that we're ever going to solve these problems. Okay, so this, you would think, well, this is a natural way to do things if you were a citizen scientist. Say it's working, why do this? Well, this is written for what audience? Who's the audience here? Scientists. Scientists is the audience for this paper. This is an academic journal. It's not written in a newspaper. It's not a movie, right? It's in an academic journal. So it's written for scientists. And scientists are skeptical of citizen science. Why? One very, very basic reason that people don't talk about too much, but I really think it's true. That's because those citizens do not have their union card. They did not have to suffer in graduate school. They did not have to suffer and get their PhD. So I am very sure they did not suffer. They do not know how to do it. He suffered, he can do it. He knows, he suffered. She suffered. Oh, you suffered, you can do it. But those citizens, I don't know. You've got to read. So we know that's entirely wrong, right? That's just bullshit. But you tend to defend your turf. There's some truth to it. Psychologists in the 1950s were pretty clear about doing lots of experiments showing that people aren't that good at observing. And the result of that in the US is that the idea of having an eyewitness is kind of slowly going away. You know, I saw him shoot it. Well, the way your brain works, maybe you didn't, right? So people and the way their brains work are not as good as a machine, usually. But on the other hand, we're incredibly flexible. We can do lots of things machines can't do. We're very valuable. And we can have all kinds of curiosity a machine can never have. So we have lots of advantages over machines. And the other thing we know is, we know that in certain taxa, and almost, you're always going to find someone in every taxa that actually knows more than the academics. It's really, really true in birding, the most important group. Because the academics stay inside and they look at their computer and they do these calculations or they do DNA sequencing and they don't spend time in the field. So the best birders in the United States are not academics anymore. I can tell you that for sure. I don't know if it's true in Brazil. Is it true in Brazil?
Some of them.
Yeah. So what's interesting about that is then you have this conversation. Because you go in the field and you recognize, oh, so-and-so is as good or better than I am. This was really proven to me very, very clearly by Louis Liebenberg in Africa, South Africa. And we'll talk about Cyber Tracker. I don't think there's going to be time today, but tomorrow I'll tell you about him. Where he worked with the Bushmen on tracking. And they are way better than anybody else at doing this. They can tell you lots more than any academic can about what's going on in the natural world. Because they know how to read the sign. Right? So it's undoubtedly true that if you were in with some indigenous people here in Brazil, they would know a lot more about what's going on than we could. Just because they live there every day. They grew up there. Okay? So citizen science is, they have to make the case here that citizen science can actually solve problems that scientists think they're supposed to be solving. That's what's going on. Does that make sense? Okay. So they do the normal thing, they talk about what's important, and then they have this long list here. I don't know if anybody looked at this list, but this list is very important. Why? Because it's a standard. This is an effort by people to try to think about all the things we could measure, and then figure out which ones we need. Oh, hard work getting through that door. Oh. Yeah, you have practice. And they're color-coded, and it's only the green ones they think, in this paper, that citizens can do. Don't believe that for a second. Okay? Citizens can do everything scientists can do. So when you're thinking of new projects, or thinking of doing breakthrough stuff, look at this list and say, you know, I know a way citizens can do this. They might be able to do something here that people didn't think they could do. And the reason that it's coded this way is because they're asking citizens to do things that citizens aren't doing yet. But that doesn't mean they can't do it. Or the other category was remote sensing, right? And so citizens usually don't send up satellites. Know any citizens sending up satellites? Anybody here know any citizens sending up satellites? Nobody? Nobody knows any citizens sending up satellites? Nobody? Are you kidding me? How about you? No? No? You're just not thinking clearly. What's the mini satellite that only goes up 200 feet? A drone! Right? So they say citizens can't do that. Well, drones are going to change monitoring, for sure. In fact, Bruno Albertini is already thinking of using drones to go get data from remote camera traps. So, in the United States, last year there were 300,000 drones sold. It's a very fancy set of instruments that all comes from this, right? It all comes from your cell phone. It's just cell phone repurposed. And you can start to do habitat monitoring with those drones, if you can organize a project.
Just a local information that yesterday they launched the regulation about drones here in Brazil, and it's going to become much more difficult to use drones now.
Right. So it's true in the United States.
Yeah.
It's impossible to monitor it.
Yeah.
Impossible. They'll never monitor it. In the United States, if we wanted to talk about drones, I can talk to you about all kinds of things they're doing, because I'm very interested in them, of course, because I'm advocating for them. But I think it is going to be possible to use drones.
Yeah.
So there's a much deeper philosophical discussion that we could have. There are many, many layers down. And it could be that drones are inappropriate in certain places for conservation reasons or for safety reasons. You know, conservation is disturbing things. Drones are noisy. It may frighten things, it may bump into things, or for safety reasons. But there could be reasonable uses. For instance, in farmland where there's trackers and other noisy things, I could imagine that drones would be a fine thing to use there. I can imagine doing it. And in fact, there's a group of people who are doing this and have been doing it for 10 years. Look up conservation drones. If you want a really dynamic person to come and talk to you about what can be done with drones, the group there is fabulous. They're really inventive. They've been working in Asia mainly, but they go around the world and give talks about how to use drones, and they've been doing it in indigenous places, you know, and they're doing all kinds of cool stuff. It's really cool. And they did it as a maker community. They first made the drones. Now you don't even have to do that. You can just buy these drones that'll get you great images and do all the stitching for you. Yes, sir.
There's a startup in Brazil now, it's called AgroTools.
Yeah.
They're developed by Brazilians, and they're using drones and other monitoring techniques to check agro land.
Yep.
and they're doing so well that Google already started to go around them to try to buy all the but it's kind of citizen science.
Yeah,
monitoring.
absolutely. The biggest market, one of the biggest market for, question? Comment? One of the biggest markets in the US for drones is monitoring agricultural fields and doing place-specific applications of either fertilizer or pesticides. Rather than putting it everywhere, we need it everywhere, they say, oh, just here a little bit now. So that's good, to be more specific, so they can measure the health of the crop and add it on. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So it's worthwhile studying these categories and saying, I think people might be interested in one of those things. Let's see if we can do it. In terms of biodiversity. What they have, so the ones in yellow are actually the citizen science ones. So they say species distributions, population abundance, and phenology. Then they say net primary productivity, disturbance, and habitat structure. But they don't say secondary productivity and nutrient retention, ecosystem function. Okay, so they don't talk so much about remote sensing, but the green is remote sensing, I think. Did I get it right? Oh, come on up. It says remotely sensed. Okay, so there's, they got some more data, but that's worth studying, okay? Then they looked at an analysis of citizen science projects, and I think they did 300 or 400 of them to see what they could do. And they just talk about their methodology of searching all these databases. And they get all this stuff, there's their results. And, so they got 420, I don't know if I should, they got 420 distinct projects here. Here we go, 420 distinct projects. And they're just coming from all kinds of places. One of the things they say is that there's some places now that do many projects, one portal. And a good example of that is iNaturalist. iNaturalist supports more than one project. So it might be eventually here in Brazil that you use iNaturalist or CyberTracker or Citizen Science or citsci.org software or some other portal that somebody has somewhere to do your many projects. You can support many kinds of projects with one platform if the platform has some flexibility. So here they say iNaturalist has 1,850 projects alone. And they talk about all the different places that projects are running. Let's see here. And then the second thing is this assessment of biodiversity data in GBIF. So one of the things you would say is if see if I can see this table. I think I went too far. Come on, find it. It's equal to, right? This is by the essential variables, what they do. This is the distribution of the projects, which we already said are mainly in the U.S. and according to their analysis, mainly in the U.S. and Europe. So you see the U.S. and Europe here dominating, whereas here's South and Central America, they only found 3. But we know that's not true. That's only the ones they found, right? So there are many more out there. It's just how big they are and how much they publish. Here's the GBIF stuff. This is the table I wanted to show you. So GBIF, this wonderful organization, was founded because taxonomists working in museums wanted to be able to share data. And they had success doing that. The Australians, particularly the Australians, drove this process. It was their idea. They convinced the OECD, and they went around and organized this, got people to participate. And this was about 2000, is that right? I think about 2000 when this finally got going, 2001. And then they get a 5-year review, and they made it their 5 years. The project looked good. And now it'll be very hard to get rid of it because it's had success. It's located in Denmark, and they get people from all around the world to participate in it. You know, people work there. And what it's doing is a very simple function. It's asking if you have a collection of biodiversity information in your country, please share it with us, and we'll advertise it to the world, and we'll help you share it. We'll develop policies, and we'll develop tools, software tools to help you share it. So that's what they've been doing. And when we go to this TADRIC meeting, the GBIF people always come and we always talk about what the next steps are, how to make it better. Okay? So here is too hard to read. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Not too big. Let me get rid of this. Maybe it'll fit better. No. Is that legible? It's kind of hard to see. Anyway, so here's all the taxa, and here's how many records they have. So that number changes every day. So now that's above 700 million. If you went and looked today, if anybody has their computer, they can just go to GBIF and see the dashboard there. Then they talk about the kinds of surveys they have. And finally, look at animals. You go across here, all the surveys here, animals, most of it is animals. That's not surprising. People like animals. Right? Who do we like the most? Monkeys. They're like us. Right? But you keep going down here, and you go to these lowly invertebrates, right? And then we finally start to get something that's a little bit bigger. And then, proportion. 19% of the databases. How about the numbers? What are the numbers? What fraction is this of this? More than half. It's more than half of all the data are birds. When you start doing all this and going down, you find out that eBird alone contributes about 30% of all the data. Why is that? Because every day people are getting records. Whereas with a taxonomy record, if you were in a museum and you had a taxonomic record, you'd have to go out there and do your survey. You have to bring the specimen back and prepare it. You'd have to label it. Every specimen costs $50. At least, more, whatever. Costs a lot of money. How much does it cost for you to see an observation with eBird? Pennies. Only certain people are allowed to collect. eBird, anybody can do it. You're not hurting anything in theory, right? So citizen science is the most important way to add data to GBIF. He says, promoting citizen science. It's not quite true, right? Because citizen science is interested in a small number of species, not all species. It's only professionals who care about marine worms. Well, there's going to be some citizen science who does, but not very many. So citizen science main contribution will be for those popular groups that are visible, that are easy to collect and contribute. Okay? So you can study that table and see the contribution of eBird, and everybody knows this. Everybody sees this. And when I first broached this subject with them, they said, I don't want to talk about it. because it was founded by the museum community and they weren't contributing as much as eBird. Here's eBird, who was an upstart, who wasn't even around when they formed the organization, didn't conceive of it, and all of a sudden they show up with all this data. That doesn't make us look good. Well, if you now go back and look at all the data from all the plants and animals and stuff, you see that citizen science has 70% of all the data in there. eBird has 30% alone, and then the other, it's European countries who are doing citizen science who've added a lot. And especially, guess which country? No surprise, which country? Who's going to have a long tradition of doing citizen science? England, right? The country with the fewest number of species in the world. But the culture to do it, right? They've been doing it, they have organized surveys for more than 50 years. They just wrote a whole series of papers in the Royal Society. There must have been 15 papers about all the work they've done over 50 years. And they have a government organized center, the Center for Hydrology or Ecology and Hydrology, Ecology and Hydrology, where a team of people promote citizen science and also analyze data. With two exceptions. The two exceptions are birds, which is so important it has a whole different organization that does it, amateurs basically, that support it, or butterflies. I think the CEH helps with all the other ones, of which there are, I think, on the order of 50 other taxa. Wildflowers, trees, and ladybird beetles, and amphibians, and certain kinds of beetles, and on and on. And that's always been my, well, if we had 50 taxa that were covered in citizen science, all the vertebrates and so on, then we'd be doing pretty well. Okay, so GBIF is dominated by citizen science. So the future looks pretty good. It looks like we're going to be able to get records cheaper and faster than the taxonomists are. But as I said earlier today, we desperately need the taxonomists. It's not as though the taxonomists are bad or not good. It's just they do something very different. And what they usually have that we don't have is at the end they have a physical specimen. And from a physical specimen you can get all kinds of data you can't get with a picture or an observation, of course. Furthermore, the taxonomists are underway now trying very hard to share their data. In the United States, there's a project funded for $100 million to try to get more museum records in. Their goal is to get 2 billion records in. They've been at it 5 years. They just got money for another 5 years. And they won't make that goal. But they'll have an infrastructure and a culture that will do more and more of that. And likewise in Europe. I have no idea of how many museum specimens there are in Brazil. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more museum specimens from Brazil in other countries than there are in Brazil. I could believe that. That would be, because a lot of the collecting culture was done in the 1880s to the 1930s rather than now. Now everybody wants to do DNA work, not do museum work. But it would be, I think, more and more you're going to be able to know where the specimen originated to, so you can find that out. Certainly everybody wants to come to Brazil and collect because it's unknown, because it's big, it's the most biodiverse place in the world. Okay? All right. So this is, well-organized paper, and on it goes. And let's see. Here's the academic language. Our review suggests, not really, blah, 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 not very strong, that existing citizen science and community-based monitoring programs collect data on nearly all the environmental important variables and cover a broad range of taxa and geographic locations. But nonetheless, CS and CBM programs have strengths and weaknesses in terms of contributions to biodiversity monitoring at an international scale. So we're good, but we're not perfect. All right, okay. So then it just goes on and talks about the literature. And here's some maps that are worth looking at because you see where the data are coming from. eBird started here, right? So it looks good. eBird spread to Canada, so it looks good. Australia had a whole separate birding program, and it ran, and it ran, and it ran, and it was going really well. It's going really well, and then it started to go, uh-oh, this is difficult. we're getting tired of doing this. Cornell said, okay, we'll take it. So they made a partnership. Now all the data from that were originated in Australia now goes through eBird. They decided that was a smart solution. You face that same challenge here with Wikiavis. One person cannot sustain anything forever. So something's going to happen. And I don't know what, but you guys will figure it out. So at some point you're going to have to do that. It's very exciting for me to see Wikiavis where one person can create something that is used by so many people and collect 2 million images. That is so cool. Imagine if you had 5 people who were as committed. If you had an institution to support that, then you'd have some sense it was going to keep going, and you'd have a sense that it could grow, and its future wasn't in danger, so to speak. Okay. When you talk to the people at eBird, they're never certain, right? But we can never be certain. You know, I can walk out there and some person can run me over, or I can die of a heart attack. You just never know. That's just the way life is. But I'm pretty sure now eBird is here to stay. It's a huge marketing tool for the laboratory. It's a huge marketing tool for the university. And that's the way I'm sure people feel about Wikiavis. It can't go away. We don't know what its future is exactly, but it can't go away. If the founder died suddenly, somehow people would rescue it. It's just so many people interested in it. Yeah.
How could it be managed for the two to join?
So that's the discussions we've been talking about.
A lot.
Who has been
With
talking?
Luciano and with Kelly.
Saraiva and everybody, and with Wikiavis people. But I'm going to talk a little bit about
You're going to
what
talk
we do.
about that. Yeah, he's going to talk.
Thank
about
you.
It was a nice chatting.
Yeah. All right, so I think there's enough here. I've told you what I think are the key points of this paper, and I should let people here comment or ask questions or share their ideas. Who read the paper and had some insights or questions or saw something that I didn't mention that's important? Anybody comment?
In the article, they point a difference between citizen science and community-based monitoring.
Yeah.
It's there is a really difference between these two, or they use just for things easier for analyze the data, or they are really different. Citizen science.
Yeah,
really
I don't
different.
see them as so different. I see them as growing from different traditions and one sort of community-oriented and going upward, and citizen science is the scientists going downward. But I see them as essentially doing this, gathering the same kind of data,
Okay.
and the data gathering is done by the citizens. So I think that I tend to emphasize the similarities, you see the differences. The question is, for me, can the data be shared and come together? And certainly community-based monitoring programs are sending data to GBIF. So, other comments? I think that's important. So here's 2 different names. Are they the same or similar? Well, they share some things. It's sort of like crowdsourcing. Is that citizen science? Sometimes, sometimes not. So I'm sure there are examples of citizen science that are kind of community-based monitoring, and likewise there are examples of community-based monitoring that are strictly citizen science, but there could be differences too. Sometimes the name is used to, just as a label to entice people in. Other comments? Somebody else read have another comment?
I find it very interesting that when they are discussing about the quality of the data, and they say they're no more problematic than those collected by professional scientists.
So this is a group of citizen scientists saying, come on, believe us, come on. So if you had seen that paper written by a bunch of scientists, they would never write that. But they have to make their case. So Alan has been working on this a lot for scientists. You know, that's his big project is data quality. And that's what Tadwig is working on. That's what I'm working on. I think it's a real problem. I think it's a real problem for the scientific community. And I think it's the obligation of citizen science to demonstrate they're collecting good data, which they can do. I don't think that's hard to do, but I don't think they have it yet in their vision to demonstrate it's true. And I'll talk tomorrow about that since I'm so passionate about it. I'll show you the ways I think we can do it. Go ahead, Bill.
And there is another point about the funding. They point that it's a question that how to fund those kind of programs. And where do people in those programs they found money to?
So this is a very important point. How do you fund things? And we all worry about getting research dollars at the university. You know, my life is writing grant proposals, sending them out, hoping somebody's going to fund my research so I can be a good scientist. And I did that for a long time. And now I'm kind of thinking differently about it. I'm thinking much more, what do I want to do that I think is important? Not what the granting agencies think or what these people think. I'm thinking not in the narrowness of the university.
But you're not in the beginning of your career. Okay.
That's exactly right. And when I was in the beginning of my career, I was thinking that way. Exactly that way. And I did citizen science on the side because I don't think my colleagues would have approved it. But I can tell you now wholeheartedly that that's changing in the US. One of the most successful persons in my department has a Zooniverse project. And he also started a project to get money directly to scientists from citizens. So bypassing the normal channels. Science is opening up now, in my opinion. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing. But that doesn't really answer your question because it's very good for you to start projects and to get funding from institutions. And for your project, I don't know. But there's many sources, and I think it's a good time from a citizen science point of view to try.
And even the citizens are a financial, can be financial
Oh,
support.
definitely.
For example, Wikiavis, there's no money from, it's donation from the people who use Wikiavis. There's no outside money there.
So the risky thing, it seems very risky because it's not traditional, it doesn't meet the model of what people expect and promote you with. So all I can say is in a political sense, before you do something that's outside the normal bounds of what's expected for you, make a deal with the people who will vote on your progress. Just go in and talk to the dean, talk to the chair, talk to your colleagues in a very informal way. You know, I'm very excited about this. It seems it's an up-and-coming idea. I am the next generation, right? Right? In some ways, that's why you're there. You're there to tell them what's really exciting. Because if you just keep doing what they did, that does not much. So it's really your obligation to kind of come in with that enthusiasm. If you're too far in front, that's not good. I've done that too much. The idea was too advanced for people. And then it didn't get funded. If you're too far behind, that's even worse. But you got to get that sweet spot, especially when you're starting. But I think this gentleman would help you. The former vice provost, right? He can testify or write a letter for you, or somebody like that. You know, you can do it.
iNaturalist, who funds iNaturalist?
So that's very interesting. Nobody funded iNaturalist. These guys just did it.
Volunteer-based,
They did it for a long time. And so they came to a point where it was getting pretty tough. They had other jobs, they did other things. They really were getting awful tired of working so hard and not having any money. Right? It's after a while, everybody comes to that point. And so what happened was they made a deal with the Cal Academy of Sciences. And the Cal Academy of Sciences signed a document saying they would pay for 4 lines. They wanted big data. These guys were doing it. I can tell you lots of rumors I've heard about what's happening at the Cal Academy. One of the things I do know is they fired taxonomists. They wanted to do ecosystem stuff. So opposite of what I would have said. I would have said, reach out to the public, use natural history, use taxonomy, use this stuff. But they said, oh no, we're going to do ecosystem. Well, people don't relate to ecosystem very well, in my opinion. But that's who they hired. So it's always a challenge. You have to make the case. Citizen science, though, is really growing. If you want inspiration, If you want inspiration about the role of citizen science in society, there's no one better than Darlene Cavalier. Darlene Cavalier, I'll finish this and then we'll move on to you folks. Darlene Cavalier started out as an undergraduate doing communication. That was her field. And she was a cheerleader for the football team. And she moved from a cheerleader to the football team to the cheerleader for a professional basketball team. So she's extremely athletic and she has to be very good looking, right? You can't do that. You can never be selected. At the same time, she moved on the track of doing science. She likes science, so she's doing science. And she's in communication, so she worked for Discover magazine. And she wrote articles and found interesting things for people. And the end result now is she runs SciStarter. And if you talk to her, you think, well, she's not a scientist, is she? But she is so enthusiastic about citizen science because that's the place you can find the projects. She's getting NSF money. She convinced them to, she got her PhD from Arizona State, but she lives in Maryland or something like that, so she's running a project distantly. You know, she's having all kinds of success. Nothing to do with science. She's about communication, totally. It's helping citizen science. She's so enthusiastic. You know, she lectured to my class. It was wonderful. She really thinks it's, and she did this cool thing. When she was a cheerleader for some professional basketball team, she convinced people in the audience to take swabs of their skin to do a big study about microbiomes on athletes and citizens. So she got 6 labs where they did the analysis of the DNA. So it's an example where someone who's, you know, just got the bug, so to speak, you know, is bitten by the excitement of it. Outside of science, that's a very good indication. And I think what's important is that it can be used in so many ways. You know, you can have a particular citizen science project on X and connect people to science. But the label citizen science is being used to solve so many different kinds of problems that the field itself is going to grow. I don't think you have any worries about that. You know, now there's societies, now there's a journal. Lots of things are changing academically. Okay, let's take a break and then we'll set up for to hear our local heroes talk about citizen science. Good. All right.